My younger sister had suffered from low blood sugar since she was a child, and her frequent illnesses made our parents dote on her excessively. During the National Day holiday, I brought my boyfriend home for the first time. My mother pulled me into the kitchen and said, "He seems decent. Why don't you let your sister have him? You're studying at a prestigious university. You'll definitely find someone better suited for you after graduating." My mother constantly pressured me to get married. However, due to the pandemic, I hadn't returned home in 2 years and hadn't met any of the men she introduced. A month ago, my father insisted that I come home for the holiday to meet a man they had chosen for me. A small-town official, 10 years older than me, divorced, with a 6-year-old daughter. They praised his stable job and the fact that he owned several shops near the bus station. They even said, "Once your sister gets married, you can have a son, and everything will be yours." Isn't that better than struggling in the city? I was baffled. How could my parents think it was okay for me to become a stepmother? My father softened his tone, saying, "If you marry him, our family will be reunited, and we can all live together happily." My parents rarely expressed affection or mentioned missing me, and for a moment my heart softened. But then my mother added, "Once you're married, he can arrange a government job for your sister. Isn't that great?" I laughed bitterly at myself. "Emily, haven't you learned your lesson yet?" I coldly replied. "Then let my sister marry him." My mother blurted out, "How can that be? He's a whole zodiac cycle older than her. A 12-year difference is too much." They wouldn't dare let my sister, a college graduate, marry him. But they think he's a good match for me, a prestigious university graduate. It's all about status, isn't it? The favoritism is still the same. My parents brought up the topic repeatedly, but I refused every time. One early morning at 4 a.m., my father sent me a message. "Emily, back when I sold tea, I'd wake up this early too. You were always asleep, but I'd slip some money into your hand. Do you remember?" I did. My mother had a difficult childbirth with me and nearly died. The family was deep in debt, so she didn't care much for me. When I was 6 months old, she left me with my grandparents to work in the South. 2 years later, she gave birth to my sister and stayed by her side. When I was 9, my grandfather passed away, and my grandmother's health declined. They brought me back home. But my sister slept with my parents while I was left alone in a dark, damp room. At night, I was too scared to go to the outdoor bathroom and would wet the bed. The next morning, my sister would mock me, and my mother would scold me while changing the sheets. She found 5 coins under my pillow, which my sister cried for. So my mother gave them to her and handed me a single coin instead. "Your sister's health isn't good. You're the older one, be more generous," she said. Every time my father went away, he'd give me 5 coins. But that meager allowance never reached me. Still, those moments were rare glimpses of warmth in my childhood. I thought my father had loved me once. At 4 a.m., the city was still asleep. The light from my phone made my eyes sting as I replied, "I remember. You always gave me 5 coins." He texted back, "You're 26 now. Since starting university, you've rarely come home. This National Day, come back for a visit." Perhaps because I lacked affection growing up, even as an adult, a part of me still longed for my parents' love. I agreed. But to avoid awkward matchmaking, I spent $5,000 to hire a fake boyfriend. His name was Ethan, an acting student from the same university as my best friend's junior. We arranged to meet at a fried chicken place near the train station. As the boarding time approached, Ethan hadn't shown up. I was about to call him when someone tapped my shoulder from behind. Turning around, I met a pair of deep amber eyes. He was tall and lean, wearing a white hoodie, his short hair neatly styled. Even with a mask on, he exuded a youthful charm. But when I compared him to the photos he'd sent, his looks were only average. I pulled out my phone to double-check, but he smiled and said, "I'm Ethan. I'm not fake. Maybe the lower half of my face isn't photogenic." Before I could respond, the boarding announcement blared. The crowd surged forward and I stumbled, but Ethan quickly steadied me. "Be careful," he said, not letting go even after I regained my balance. I tilted my head to look at him, his eyes sparkling. "From now on, you have to play your part. I'm your boyfriend, so of course I'll take care of you." I was impressed. He was a natural actor. This definitely wasn't his first time doing something like this. After boarding, I struggled to carry my oversized suitcase down the stairs. Ethan effortlessly lifted it with one hand. Embarrassed, I offered to carry his backpack, but he declined. It's light. Just watch your step. I rolled my eyes. I'm not a child. But as soon as I finished speaking, I tripped and nearly fell. Ethan laughed, helping me up. According to scientific research, beautiful and intelligent girls often have poor balance, he teased. I raised an eyebrow. Really? I've never heard of such a study. He grinned. That's because I just made it up. Once on the train, Ethan removed his mask to drink water, and I realized I'd been wrong. His entire face was flawless. The girl sitting in front of him blushed and started typing furiously on her phone. I bet she was imagining 100 romantic scenarios with him. Honestly, I felt a little flustered too, but I quickly pushed those thoughts aside and handed him 2 sheets of A4 paper. Here's your character profile and some basic information. Read it so you don't slip up. According to the story, we're classmates, so don't call me sis. His long, slender fingers tapped the table. Then I'll call you Emily. Normally, the name was simple, but when it came from his lips, it sounded soft and lingering. I cleared my throat. Fine. Then I'll call you Ethan. He paused, his tone playful. Try saying it now. I hesitated. Emily. Ethan. He frowned. Emily, do you have a stutter? I glared at him. You're the one with the stutter, Ethan. He burst out laughing, his eyes sparkling. The whole carriage heard that. This guy was infuriating. When we arrived home, it was already evening. My sister Sophie opened the door. Ethan removed his mask and greeted her politely. The moment he smiled, the dim old staircase seemed to light up. Sophie was stunned for 3 seconds before blushing and stammering. Hello, Ethan. She tried to help with the luggage, but Ethan declined gracefully. Sophie pouted. Sis, you've been hiding such a handsome boyfriend. You only sent us his worst photos, didn't you? I was about to retort, but Ethan cut in. Don't blame Emily. I'm just not photogenic. But your photography skills are excellent. You should take some pictures of me sometime. Sophie was surprised. How did you know I'm good at photography? He smiled. I've seen the photos in Emily's social circle. They're even better than real life. I almost burst out laughing. Sophie's face froze. His words sounded like a compliment, but upon closer inspection, they weren't. My parents were also taken aback by Ethan's looks. After the greetings, my mother called a nearby restaurant to order a roast goose and half a roast duck. Clearly, this was the benefit of Ethan's good looks. While he was in the bathroom, Sophie whispered to me, Sis, Ethan isn't really your boyfriend, is he? I paused. If he's not my boyfriend, is he yours? Since when have I ever liked talking to boys? And I'm just average looking. How could I have such a handsome boyfriend? I clenched my fists. Why didn't I like talking to boys? Didn't she know? When I first came to live with our parents, I wasn't used to the local kids, but you were close to them. I don't know what you said, but one day after school for boys carried me to a manure pit near the threshing ground. They swung me back and forth like a swing, threatening to throw me in if I ever disobeyed them again. I'll never forget the stench or the sight of the fat wriggling maggots. In the end, my mother found me and brought me home. She knew Sophie had instigated it, but only scolded her lightly before turning to me and saying, your sister's health is poor and she's sensitive, you're the older one, don't provoke her. After that I avoided boys until high school, when I gradually regained my composure. Sophie shrugged indifferently. Why are you still holding on to childhood grudges? How petty. What I called a years-long nightmare was just a childish prank. During dinner my parents started probing Ethan about his background. He said his father ran a private business. Wait, that didn't match the profile I'd given him. Sophie chimed in. Business must be tough during the pandemic. Ethan calmly replied, not bad. Last year my father's company made over 10 million in profit. It's not as much as previous years, but at least we're not losing money. He continued, my mother is the deputy head of a city hospital and my annual salary including investments is about 800,000. My parents' eyes lit up and Sophie was equally surprised. Under the table I pinched Ethan's hand hard. You're overdoing it. Sophie recovered and taunted, sis, your standards are too high. Ethan is so outstanding, yet you still find him lacking. What kind of man do you need? My mother joined in. That's right, someone like Ethan is hard to find in this town. Ethan looked at me, and smiled awkwardly. I'm just average, I'm barely worthy of Emily. Sophie rested her chin on her hand, pretending to be innocent. I'm so jealous of you, sis. You've always been popular with handsome guys since we were kids. They take you out all night. But you always said they were just friends. Ethan, you're amazing for WI her over. Was she implying I was promiscuous? I sneered. You're talking about yourself, aren't you? Sophie froze, her eyes red. Did I say something wrong? Are you mad at me? Ethan, don't mind her. I was just talking nonsense. My mother scolded me. Your sister just misspoke. She didn't mean anything bad. You're the older one. Why are you holding a grudge? Let's eat. She served me a piece of fish full of bones. The curved bone was like a hook stabbing my eye and making me wheeze as a child. I'd nearly choked on a fishbone and had avoided fish ever since, but Sophie loved it, so our family had fish every few days. My mother said, if you don't like fish, have some dog meat. Your father went through a lot to get this. I felt nauseous. I couldn't eat dog meat either. At my grandparents' house, we had a black dog named Blackie. He'd been with me for 5 years, walking me to school every day and waiting at the village entrance for me to finish. Later, he followed me to my parents' house, but a month later, they sold him for $80. I dug my fingers into the dirt, clinging to the dog seller's hand, begging them not to take Blackie away. My father, embarrassed, dragged me back inside, saying dogs are just animals. Keeping them is a waste of food. If that was the case, why didn't they sell Sophie's little dog? Blackie only ate rice and water, while her dog ate meat and fat. I refused both dishes, and my mother's face darkened. Why won't you eat anything? Sophie immediately spoke up. Sis, Mom and Dad got up at 5 a.m. to prepare this. Don't be so picky. Eat a little. Do you act like this with Ethan too? Ethan glanced at her and smiled lightly. Emily isn't as easy to please as you. Sophie smirked. Ethan served her the largest piece of dog meat. Since you're not picky, eat more. It's delicious. Sophie's face stiffened. He added 2 more pieces. Eat quickly before it gets cold. Sophie looked like she was about to vomit. My mother hurriedly removed the dog meat from her bowl. Sophie doesn't eat dog meat. Ethan looked at me and smiled. Looks like we'll have to visit more often, otherwise we'll only remember Sophie's preferences and forget what Emily likes. My mother's face turned red with embarrassment. My father quickly changed the subject. Emily, if there's anything you like to eat, just say so. Don't be shy. After dinner, my father took Ethan to drink tea, and I went to the kitchen to clean up. As soon as I put the bowls in the sink, Sophie followed me and she said nonchalantly, Sis, Ethan is really good. Why don't you let me have him? I slammed the bowl down. Haven't you taken enough for me? Sophie shrugged. What have I taken? You weren't even dating him back then. He chose me because he thought I was better than you. Daniel was my high school classmate during our last winter break in university. We reconnected at a class reunion and hit it off. We texted good morning and good night every day, went on dates, and even held hands. I thought it was love, but a month later, Sophie publicly announced on social media that she was dating him. Daniel apologized to me, saying it was all his fault and that Sophie was innocent. He told me not to make things difficult for her. I sneered. You know you have a boyfriend, right? She smirked. So what? Even married people can get divorced. Changing boyfriends is normal. Besides, his family's business is failing and they're drowning in debt. I don't want to marry into hardship. She spoke without a hint of shame. Sis, I like Ethan. Let's compete fairly based on our abilities. I was furious. Are you insane? Why do you always want to steal what's mine? She smiled coldly. Who told you to be better than me? Who told you to always compete with me for our parents' affection? But they're my parents too. I've never taken their love away from you. Our argument grew so loud that my mother came in. What's going on now? Sophie immediately changed her expression, leaning weakly against the table. I'm feeling a bit dizzy. I need to rest, but sis won't let me go until I finish washing the dishes. My mother panicked. Is it low blood sugar again? Go lie down. Emily, your sister isn't feeling well, and you're still making her work. You haven't been home in over 2 years. Is washing the dishes once going to kill you? I threw the sponge into the sink. I'm not feeling well either. I'm going to my room. My mother scolded. What kind of attitude is that? I slammed the door shut. When I opened the wardrobe to hang my clothes, I found every drawer stuffed with Sophie's belongings. There was a knock on the door and my mother came in with a glass of milk. Are you feeling unwell? Do you need me to buy medicine? No, I'm fine. She also noticed the wardrobe and explained you rarely come home, so Sophie's things took up all the space. I'll clean it up for you. It's fine. I'll be leaving in a few days anyway. She sat on the bed. Emily, are you upset? Talk to me. Since you were little, you've always hidden your feelings. Learn from Sophie a little. If something's bothering you, just tell me. The dim light cast shadows on her face, making her look much older. In that moment in the small room, she seemed like my mother alone. I whispered, only those who are loved have the right to act spoiled. Mom, have you ever loved me like you love Sophie? The room fell silent. My mother tightened her grip on my hand. Your sister's health isn't good, so your father and I interrupted her. I'm tired. I want a rest. She sighed and left. I sat silently on the bed for a long time, then remembered Ethan was still in the house. I didn't see him, and Sophie was also gone. I texted him, where are you? Downstairs getting some fresh air. Do you miss me already? I walked to the window and looked down in the dim light. Ethan was standing under the trees saying something that made Sophie laugh. Her clear laughter pierced through the night, stabbing my eardrums. I texted, are you alone? He glanced at his phone, the screen lighting up. His smile. He typed, And your annoying little sister. He quickly returned to the room. Your sister just tried to seduce me. She's a pro. He looked at me and leaned closer, whispering, Emily, are you upset? Then I'll stay away from her from now on. He hummed a song and went into the bathroom. His jacket was draped over the chair, and as I went to hang it up, his wallet fell out, revealing his ID. I picked it up and froze. At that moment, the door opened and Ethan stood at the threshold. Seeing me holding his ID, he frowned and shrugged helplessly. Too late, you've discovered my secret. He sat down, picked up his wallet, and looked up at me like a pitiful puppy. Are you going to kick me out now? We stared at each other for 10 seconds before I smiled lightly. Why would I kick you out? You're helping me complete my mission. He also smiled and handed me the wallet. Then keep it safe for me. Now that you know my secret, I can't run away anymore. As soon as the bathroom door closed, I called my best friend Fiona. She was on a trip with her boyfriend and complained about being stuck in traffic. I asked, have you passed customs yet? I'll send you a photo. I sent her a picture of Ethan and she screamed over the phone, he's so handsome, too handsome. After hearing my story, she fell silent for a moment before saying, that's strange, let me investigate, but honestly, if you want to take him down, I support you. Over the next 2 days, Ethan behaved impeccably, making my parents increasingly satisfied. Even their attitude toward me warmed up. Since I had hired him, I couldn't let him stay idle. I took him to visit some places, but Sophie always wanted to taggle along. If I refused, she would whine, Ethan, I'll be so bored at home alone, please take me with you. My mother would immediately support her. On the morning of the 5th day, my parents woke us up early. Today we're going back to our hometown to dig up lotus roots. Since my grandparents passed away, we rarely visited. The fields had been leased out, leaving only a small pond in front of the house. Ethan helped my father install a pump to drain the pond. My mother went to find baskets and Sophie fanned herself while praising Ethan endlessly. Ethan, you're amazing, you even know how to do this. Ethan glanced at her coldly. Anyone who graduated high school can do this. My father, wearing protective gear, waded into the pond and soon pulled up a fat lotus root. He smiled and handed it to me. Emily, take this and wash it. You loved this as a child. Under the morning sun, the wrinkles at the corners of his eyes looked unusually gentle. Sophie pouted, Dad, I want one too. I also love lotus roots. My father laughed. Wait, I'll dig up another one for your sister first. Perhaps because it had just been pulled from the mud, the lotus root felt warm and slimy in my hands. For lunch, we ate at my uncle's house. My father went into the kitchen to make fried lotus root cakes. When the dish was still steaming, he placed it in front of me. I made this especially for you. Remember when you were 8 and I made this? You ate half the plate. The cakes were oily and salty, not particularly tasty, but I still ate 2 pieces. The meal was harmonious with my parents, uncle, and aunt constantly serving me food. The warm autumn sun made my smile grow more genuine. Just then Ethan leaned over and whispered, be careful, warmth and gentleness often hide sharp things. After the meal, my uncle took Ethan to see his new car, and I stayed to help my aunt clean up. She held my hand and said, sit down, I'll do it. I stepped back. You can buy anything online these days. If it's not good, you can leave a 1-star review. My aunt was furious. What do you mean? Are you saying you don't want to owe us anything, or are you afraid we'll use this small favor to morally pressure you later instead of worrying about us? You should think about why your own daughter doesn't want to come home. My uncle jumped up angrily. Have you been reading too many books? How dare you talk to your elders like that? I turned my back and walked straight into the sunset, leaving behind their endless scolding. As I approached the hospital, I received a call from an unknown number. It was Daniel. Emily, I've been trying to contact Sophie. I even went to her house, but no one was there. Do you know where she is? She's at the hospital. Daniel panicked. Is it serious? You'll see for yourself. When I arrived at the hospital room, Sophie was clinging to Ethan's sleeve. Ethan, I'm thirsty. Can you pour me some water? Ethan raised an eyebrow, opened a bottle of mineral water, and handed it to her. Sophie pouted, her eyes sparkling. Ethan, it's too sweet. Ethan smiled ambiguously. Sweet water is spring water. Sophie shook her head seriously. No, oh, it's because you're sweet. The tattooed man in the next bed couldn't help but laugh. If you're in love, do it somewhere else. Think about a single dog. Sophie blushed and lowered her head but didn't let go of Ethan's sleeve. Just then a gust of wind blew past and Daniel rushed in, worried. Sophie, are you okay? Why didn't you tell me you were hospitalized? What's wrong? The smile on Sophie's face froze. She reluctantly let go of Ethan's sleeve. I walked into the room and Ethan greeted me warmly. Emily, you're here. The tattooed man frowned, looking at us. Daniel also turned around, his eyes full of hostility. Who are you? Ethan touched his nose without hesitation. I'm probably your brother-in-law. The tattooed man spat out his water, looking at us in confusion. Ethan looked at Sophie with disappointment. So Sophie has a boyfriend? I've never heard her mention it. Daniel's face turned pale. Sophie looked at him, then at Ethan, and finally said, he's my ex-boyfriend. Daniel's eyes widened. Sophie, don't joke around, we're engaged. Sophie's acting skills were impressive. Her eyes wet up with tears and her voice trembled. Daniel, I don't love you anymore. You're always busy and never have time for me. I don't want to keep waiting like this. Let's break up. Don't bother me anymore. Daniel was curious. Aren't I doing all this for our future? I'm working hard so you can live a good life. I patted his shoulder. Don't explain yet. Listen to this first. I played a recording of Sophie's voice. So what, even married people can get divorced? Changing boyfriends is normal. Besides, his Family's business is failing and they're drowning in debt. I don't want to marry into hardship. Sophie's face turned red. She jumped up and tried to grab my phone, but it was too late. The recording had finished playing. She burst into tears, looking at Ethan with pleading eyes. Ethan, that was just talk in the heat of the moment. I really like you. The tattooed man was so shocked. He hiccuped. Ethan smiled and asked, really? Sophie nodded vigorously. Daniel's face was white with anger. Aren't you going to explain anything to me? Sophie lowered her head. I'm sorry, Daniel, feelings can't be forced. I really don't have feelings for you anymore. Daniel laughed bitterly, his eyes red. I'm the biggest fool in the universe. He patted Ethan's shoulder. Buddy, she's a good person, take care of her. Then he staggered away. I looked at Ethan and signaled that we needed to talk. He smiled and nodded. Emily, I'm always here for you whenever you need me. Sophie panicked and grabbed his sleeve. Ethan, are you mad at me? I just like you so much. Ethan looked at her for 2 seconds, then patted her head lightly. Go to sleep, I'll be back soon. Downstairs, Ethan took out a pack of cigarettes and lit one. This was the first time I'd seen him smoke, but he soon put it away with regret. This is a hospital, he said. He turned to me and looked at me intently. You've been crying. He reached out to touch my face, but I turned away. I know all about your past. Why did you come to my house? What do you really want? Fiona had contacted her junior, the real Ethan. His father had suddenly fallen ill, but the fake boyfriend job had already been assigned, so he couldn't back out. He transferred the job to someone else in the group for $1,000, keeping $4,000 for himself. That day when Ethan was in the shower, I saw his ID and realized the name and age didn't match the information Fiona had provided. Moreover, he was much more handsome than the photos. This made me weigh, so I asked Fiona to investigate further. Ethan looked at me for a few seconds, his expression sincere and hard to describe. I just wanted to help you vent, but the more harmless I seem, the more dangerous you feel. Right, you can handle your own affairs. His smile deepened. Let me guess how you'll handle it. You'll probably just cut off all contact with your family, right? Your heart is too soft. I clenched my fists. Even if I want revenge, I can do it myself. Under the setting sun, Ethan raised his hand, the light shining through his fingers onto his face. His expression was unreadable, only shadowy in the flickering light. Don't dirty your hands, let me do it. My hands are already filthy. The sun set below the horizon and darkness swallowed his face. His low voice carried a hint of conspiracy. Consider it repayment for the time we met before. The street lights outside the hospital lit up, illuminating his flawless face. When did we meet? He smiled. Think about it. I hope you remember, otherwise I'll be heartbroken. I tried to recall, but couldn't. I have to go. If I stay too long, the prey will escape. He placed his hand on his chest, his voice hypnotic. Don't worry, as long as I'm here, no one will bully you. If anyone does, I'll make them pay 100 times over. I turned and walked away without looking back to see his expression. I knocked on the door, and Sophie's coyish voice came from inside. Come in. When she saw it was me, her face immediately darkened. I thought you weren't coming back. I ignored her and started packing. I hadn't brought much, so it only took a few minutes. Sophie leaned against the door frame. Smug. So you've admitted defeat, leaving so easily, no challenge at all. Do you know where Ethan went? He went to buy me milk tea. He's so sweet. I picked up my suitcase and walked out. She followed, boasting, whether it's our parents, my boyfriend, or anything else, everything is mine. You'll never win against me. I couldn't take it anymore. I put down my suitcase and slapped her hard. The slap was so painful that my hand went numb. Sophie's face turned red. You dare hit me? I grabbed her hair and clapped her twice more, once on each cheek. I've put up with you for years. Sophie's eyes filled with hatred. She swung her hand, trying to grab my hair, but a hand reached out and stopped her. What happened to your face? Under Ethan's concerned gaze, Sophie immediately changed her expression, becoming weak and pitiful. Ethan, sis, hit me. Look, my face is swollen. Ethan tightened his grip on her wrist, making her wince in pain. He looked at me coldly. Emily, I didn't expect you to be so cruel. Sophie would never do something like this. Sophie was stunned, completely confused. What, so I got slapped for nothing? Unwilling to accept it, she burst into tears. The kitchen door opened and my parents came out, seeing their beloved daughter's swollen face. My mother's eyes filled with tears. Emily, what's going on? How could you hit someone? Your sister just came back from the hospital. What kind of sister are you? I picked up my suitcase, ready to leave. Sophie cried louder. Mom, Dad, it hurts so much. My mother, holding a knife, stepped in front of me. Today you have to apologize to Sophie, or don't call yourself our daughter anymore. My father added, if you still consider us family, apologize to your sister now. The knife gleamed dangerously close to my face, as if they would slit my throat if I disobeyed. In the blade's reflection, I saw my distorted face, a shadow that had been twisted for over a decade. I laughed coldly. Fine, from now on, consider me never born. Keep your precious daughter and live happily ever after. My parents were shocked. What do you mean? I said exactly what I said. If you want to contact me in the future, do it through a court summons. My reaction was beyond their expectations. They were too stunned to react, just standing there dumbfounded. I pulled my suitcase and left. As I passed the threshold, Ethan reached out to help me. He leaned close and whispered cheerfully, congratulations, sis, you've been reborn. The door Closed behind me from now on. That house had nothing to do with me. I blocked my parents' numbers. At first I planned to block Sophie too, but Fiona advised against it. Keep her watching her live streams every day will be fun. Sophie updated her social media status constantly. One day she checked in at Disneyland, the next she dined at a Michelin-starred restaurant. Today she shopped at luxury stores. Tomorrow she got her hair done. She had quit her stable job with a monthly salary of $44,000. Her daily life revolved around eating and having fun with Ethan. It seemed this was Ethan's request, as his face never appeared in her posts, only his back or vague mentions. Fiona took my phone and squinted, zooming in on the details of a Louis Vuitton bag in one of the photos. This looks fake. She continued scrolling, clicking her tongue. This watch is fake too. Anyone who's seen the real thing can tell at a glance. And this. She laughed. It all looks fake, but your sister probably hasn't seen the real thing, so she doesn't realize it. I took a sip of water. She won't think it's fake. After all, he's the crown prince of a wealthy family. A few days later, Sophie posted a blurry screenshot of a stock account with a caption, "Ethan taught me how to invest. Hopefully, I'll hit the limit soon." A newbie investing like this was asking for trouble. Unexpectedly, 2 days later, she posted again, "It really hit the limit. Ethan is amazing. I followed the stock code. After hitting the limit, it started falling continuously, dropping 40% in a short time." I wasn't sure if Sophie had sold at the peak. Not long after she boasted about a store purchase contract. Ethan says women should have fixed assets to rely on in the current pandemic. Traditional businesses were struggling, yet she bought a store in a remote area of the city. Would it even rent out, let alone turn a profit? Soon after, Sophie flaunted her driver's license. "Finally got my license thanks to Ethan's guidance." 3 days later, she posted a photo of a new Porsche. According to Ethan, independent women should have their own cars. The price doesn't matter. Women should stand on their own wheels, not waste time on subways or buses. Fiona and I sighed in unison. Ethan is really good at brainwashing. Fiona almost called me every night, mainly to follow the latest updates on Sophie's social media. It had to be said that her post-GS kept our friendship alive. During one gathering, Fiona scrolled through her phone and sighed. "She must have spent a lot of money recently. Do you think Ethan paid for everything?" I recalled Ethan's expression when he talked about his dirty hands and shook my head. "Probably not. He always talks about women's independence. An independent woman wouldn't ask a man for money." Fiona laughed. "You're right, Sophie. And I still had some mutual friends, so every time she posted there were many likes and lively comments." She replied quickly, her tone humble yet boastful, with a hint of disdain for those beneath her. By the end of December, on Christmas Day, as I left work, I saw Sophie waiting outside the company. She wore a new coat and Boss sneakers, leaning against a red Porsche, attracting many glances. "Sis, are you spending the holiday alone, Ethan? And I invited you to dinner." Ethan stepped out from behind a pillar and smiled at me. I looked at Sophie. "Your face isn't swollen anymore. Do you need a few more slaps?" Sophie instinctively covered her face and stomped her foot, acting cute. Ethan gently patted her shoulder to comfort her, then stepped closer to me. His voice was low. "Really not coming?" I lowered my voice. "What are you really after?" He raised an eyebrow and smiled faintly. "What's wrong? Feeling soft-hearted again?" He leaned close and whispered in my ear, "Sis, they're like venomous snakes. If you show weakness, they'll bite you immediately. Don't become their prey." I sneered. "I don't care about their life or death. I just don't understand what you're really after." He stood straight and pointed at the skyscraper behind me. "Do you see the top of that building? To see far, you must stand high. Only when you see the extravagance of the world can greed swell. Only when you stand high can you fall hard. Just wait and see. This play is about to end." It turned out Sophie had gone to City for a nose job. Her appearance had become more delicate, perhaps the reason she had stolen Daniel in the first place. She had always been confident in her looks, so I was surprised she had gone under the knife. Ethan explained. "I told her a few times that she was prettier than you in every way except her nose wasn't as high." Sophie, always competitive with me, couldn't let it go and decided to get a nose job. Ethan recommended a clinic that had been involved in a medical accident and had been in the news. They seemed to have paid to suppress the information, but many people in Saya still knew about it. Ethan knew it very well. That evening I met Fiona for dinner, and Sophie's story became our main topic of conversation. As the meal was ending, Sophie sent me over a dozen photos of dishes from a high-end restaurant. She texted, "Sis, the food here is exquisite and delicious. I hope one day you'll have the chance to come so I can show off in front of you." I bit my straw and replied, "Why don't you take a photo with Ethan kissing or something?" Sophie kept typing and finally sent, "Why should I show you?" I laughed mockingly. "It's not that you don't want to show me, you just can't kiss him. Can you perhaps to make up for it?" Sophie sent a photo of a Louis Vuitton bag in a box. "Ethan gave it to me. Do you like it? Next time I'll bring one for you. I have too many bags. I'm almost sick of them." That night I drank some wine with Fiona. When I got home, I found a package at my door. Inside was a Louis Vuitton bag, the latest model of the season, not cheap at all. In the box along with the receipt was a handwritten note. Sis, whether it's the bag or my heart, both are sincere. Perhaps because she was still recovering from surgery, Sophie didn't post anything on social media for about a week. Unexpectedly, a few days later, while delivering documents to a client, I ran into her at the hospital. She was causing a scene in the outpatient area. You ruined my nose and won't take responsibility. Call the head doctor out here. Someone was recording her on TikTok. The hospital, probably worried about bad publicity, quickly sent a doctor to take her to the office. No, I'm not going to explain it right here in front of everyone. She took out her iPad and showed a photo of her old nose, then removed her mask. A hot girl's face appeared, but now her nose was high and straight, the tip sharp, completely out of proportion with her round face. It looked like a fork stuck in an apple, making people not want to look twice. The doctor took out documents and videos. You insisted on this nose shape and didn't listen to our advice. The customer is always right, so we had to follow your request. Our procedures are standard, and the surgery was successful. If you continue to make trouble, we'll call the police. How's there? No problem. I've become much uglier. Sophie's words stopped when her eyes met mine in the crowd. She immediately froze, her face turning red. Without saying a word, she lowered her head and hurried away. I quickly followed. That nose is very European. It's even higher than mine. Her eyes filled with resentment. Don't gloat. I can fix it. I'll definitely become beautiful again. I'll always be prettier than you. Just then her phone rang. She froze like she'd seen a ghost, then turned it off and threw it into her bag before rushing off. From that day on, Pandora's box was opened. The devil bared its fangs and claws, pouncing on the prey it had long targeted. One morning I received a call from a loan company. Are you Sophie's sister? She owes $300,000 and needs to repay it within a month. I left. I've cut ties with her long ago. Her debts have nothing to do with me. From then on, I received debt collection calls almost daily. Although I had expected it, a rough calculation showed the total debt exceeded $1 million. But that wasn't all. In this small town, news spread quickly. Sophie's friends and classmates also contacted me asking if I knew where she was. She had promised to repay them in a week, but had disappeared. Some owed $30,000, others $50,000, and some even $80,000. At first, Sophie had used bank loans to buy a car, open a store, and play the stock market. Her social media was full of posts showing her in luxurious places, making everyone think she was successful. So when she borrowed money, no one was weary. They all fell into her trap. Those caught in online loans were all like this, borrowing from one place to pay another, living for today without worrying about tomorrow. She had been immersed in luxury for too long, thinking she was born a princess. She had received too much flattery and didn't have the courage to tear off her fake mask and face reality. She could only resort to borrowing until she could borrow no more, then completely collapsed. Sophie disappeared completely, and no one could find her. Many acquaintances posted on social media or TikTok looking for her. Her photos were plastered everywhere, accompanied by captions like, "This girl owes money and won't repay. Be careful if you see her at the end of the month." My mother contacted me, her tone friendly and concerned, as if our previous conflicts had never happened. "Emily, you'll have a holiday soon, right? Book a ticket home this year. We made a lot of smoked meat. Come back and I'll cook it for you." I put down the documents and stood up, walking to the hallway. "Ma'am, what do you need?" "Emily, it's me, your mother. Don't you recognize my voice?" "I'm sorry, ma'am. You were the one who said you didn't acknowledge me, so I can't call you mother now." My mother choked up, unable to speak. Fiona said it was just words and anger. "How could you take it seriously, ma'am? I have to go to work." "I'm hanging up." "Don't hang up." My mother quickly stopped me. "Emily, have you heard about Sophie's situation?" Her voice sounded like she was about to cry. "I didn't know she owed so much money. Debt collectors come to our door every day. The bank has seized her car, store, and anything valuable. Our house is also marked. What should we do? Where will we get the money to repay the loans?" "Ethan is a fraud." "Emily, you earn a lot. Can you help your sister a little? After all, she's your younger sister. Her health isn't good now. She's hiding, and I don't know if she's sick or how she's eating." My stomach growled. I realized I had been so busy with work that I hadn't eaten dinner. "Ma'am, I warned you before. Sophie isn't someone you can control," I said coldly. "I have to go eat dinner now." I hung up and blocked her number. She changed several numbers, sending messages begging me to save Sophie, promising to treat me fairly in the future, and even pretending to care if I had eaten breakfast or was dressed warmly. But I had been deceived by these sweet words once. How could I fall for them again? Even if they truly regretted it, I didn't care. I didn't need their love anymore. 2 days later, Ethan contacted me, inviting me to dinner. He said, "I'll show you a good show." He wore a camel coat and stood under my building waiting for me. The winter wind blew through the bare paulownia trees, but he stood tall like an ancient tree, unfazed by the cold. He tilted his head slightly and smiled at me. The Porsche drove straight to the restaurant before the car even stopped. A figure rushed over. It was Sophie. "Ethan, please help me." She banged on the car door, begging incessantly. After a while, she saw me sitting in the passenger seat, and her eyes narrowed. "Emily, why are you here?" Ethan got out and helped me open the door. After I got out, he pulled me behind him, standing straight in front of Sophie. She seemed to snap out of it, screaming, "You two teamed up to scam me." "Emily, you're despicable," Ethan said coldly. "I scammed you. It has Nothing to do with Emily, Sophie shouted. You scammed me out of my feelings. You made me like this. You're scum. I'll expose you. Ethan smiled. You did this to yourself when you started playing stocks. I told you to sell in time, but you were greedy and wanted to earn more. Did I force you to quit your job? Did I advise you to buy a car? Did I tell you to buy a store? You wanted plastic surgery, and I even tried to stop you. Those meals, those times I took you to luxurious places, they were all real. He laughed. Only the luxury goods were fake, but I spent a lot of money on them. I never held your hand, never kissed you, never confirmed a romantic relationship with you. You can expose me or sue me. Let's see who's right and who's wrong. So trembled, her eyes filled with fear, confusion, anger, and helplessness like a raging wave inside her. She screamed. You chose her, didn't you? What do I lack compared to her? Ethan took my hand and said firmly, you lack everything compared to her. Moreover, I only want to give all my favoritism to her. When you stole her warmth, didn't you think this day would come? The sky in the distance was gloomy, dark clouds rolling like a giant curtain enveloping Sophie. She stood against the light, both furious and panicked but hopeless. This expression was familiar because it had followed me throughout my youth. Back then, I didn't understand why, no matter how hard I tried, no matter how well I did in school, my parents didn't love me. What did I have to do to be right? It wasn't until I entered university that I learned to take things more lightly and treat myself better. In fact, there's no reason for favoritism. It just exists. If my parents could favor Sophie unconditionally, then there would be someone in this world who would favor me forever. If no one did, I could favor myself. Sophie stared at me, her lips trembling. Perhaps she wanted to beg me, but I looked back calmly. After a long time, she laughed self-deprecatingly. I won't beg you. I'll never beg you in this lifetime. During lunch, it started snowing outside. Snow in city was rare and the restaurant buzzed with excitement. Ethan put down his knife and fork quietly, looking out the window. I really hate snow, he said. Do you have time? Come with me somewhere. I didn't expect him to take me to a cemetery. In a faded photo, a dignified woman in her 30s smiled gently. Ethan placed a bouquet of baby's breath in front of the tombstone. Mom, I brought a friend to see you. You must have met him down there by now, right? Absolutely. Don't soften your heart again. Snowflakes fell lightly on his coat. Ethan calmly recounted the past. My mother was very talented when she was young. She came from a poor rural area and became an important pillar of the hospital at a young age. She and my father had a very good relationship, but my aunt wasn't so lucky. She fell in love with a violent boyfriend and was often beaten black and blue. My mother softened her heart and brought her to live with us. My aunt began to envy her sister, a successful woman respected at work with a young, capable, and gentle brother-in-law. Gradually, she developed other thoughts. By the time my mother found out my aunt was already pregnant, she begged for forgiveness, hoping to keep the baby. My mother never expected that her kindness would lead a wolf into her home. Distraught, she drove out to calm down but got into an accident with a large truck, killing both her and the baby in her womb. At the time she was also pregnant with my younger sibling. My father was heartbroken, but 6 months after my mother's grand funeral, he secretly married my aunt. Later, they had a son. Perhaps this was retribution. When the youngest son turned 10, he secretly took my motorcycle and died in an accident. My father was old and exhausted, unable to raise another child, so he brought me an illegitimate child back and forced me to take on the responsibility. Ethan laughed coldly. That's why I hate people who play the victim, especially younger sisters like Sophie, who constantly steal the love that should belong to their older sisters, so I keep punishing such younger sisters. Snow covered his body. I stood on tiptoe and gently brushed the snow off his head. Let's stop here, Ethan. Don't dwell on the past anymore. Let it go and love yourself. Ethan turned to look at me. I smiled. If your mother were alive, she wouldn't want a grown man like you to be haunted by the shadows of his childhood. Back then you were too young to stop what happened. Your mother's death wasn't your fault. Ethan's eyes gradually turned red. He knelt before the tombstone, trembling and bursting into tears. Mom, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I had a chance to tell you, but that woman told me not to. She lied, saying you'd be hurt if I told you. If only I had spoken sooner. Ethan cried like a 3-year-old child. On the way back, both of us were exhausted and didn't speak. At a red light, the snow outside grew heavier. He suddenly said, Sis, actually I don't hate snow that much because the day I met you it was also snowing heavily. I still couldn't remember when we had met. It's okay, he smiled, watching the snowflakes. As long as I remember you, that's enough. During the spring festival I stayed in city on New Year's Eve, Fiona called saying she would pick me up to celebrate together. When I went downstairs I saw Ethan in a white down jacket, smiling at me. Sis, I'm alone too. Can we spend the new year together temporarily? On the second day of the new year, Daniel called to invite me to his wedding. That was fast, I said. When you meet the right person you want to settle down later. My high school classmates gossiped that his fiancée was his childhood sweetheart, a fellow relocated resident. They were a perfect match. I went back to attend the wedding and catch up with some old friends. At the wedding Sophie appeared wearing a mask and pleading with Daniel to take her back. We were together for 3 years. You loved me so much, I don't believe you can get married so quickly, you're just mad at me, right? Let's make up. I've realized the person I love most is still you." She clung to him, causing her mask to fall off. My God. What had happened to her face? It was so distorted it startled me initially. Sophie's nose job hadn't gone well, but she refused to accept it, and kept getting more surgeries. However, because she was drowning in debt, she could only go to unlicensed clinics. The result was that her once passable face was now completely ruined. Her nose was crooked, and the surgical scars turned red. Whenever she got emotional, her lips were unnaturally plump, like a sausage cut in half. Daniel looked at her with disgust. "Look at yourself in the mirror. How can you still show your face under everyone's pointed stares?" Sophie put her mask back on and hurried away. After the banquet, my parents came. At first they stood against the light, and I didn't even recognize them. They looked at least a decade older. During the banquet, someone gossiped with me to help Sophie borrow money. They had mortgaged their house. When they couldn't repay the debt, the bank repossessed it. At their age, they were kicked out with no savings and had to return to their hometown. The old house there was dilapidated, making daily life inconvenient. With health issues, they couldn't even get to the hospital in time. The villagers were gossipy, and everyone pointed fingers, leaving them with no dignity. Outside the hotel, my mother grabbed my hand. "Emily, you said you'd buy us a house in your name. Can you do it now? It doesn't have to be big, just 2 bedrooms and a living room. We can't live in the countryside anymore. It's too cold. Your father and I both have rheumatism and can barely walk." She cried and pulled my clothes. "It's all my fault. We spoiled her too much. Now that I think about it, she never truly treated us well. Only you. In the summer you installed air conditioning for us. In the winter you bought us heaters. All the appliances in the house were replaced by you. Every few days you sent us clothes and food. You're the good daughter. Emily, forgive us. From now on we'll live happily together." I pushed her hand away. "But you two aren't good parents to me. I've already said if you want to contact me, do it through a court summons." My reaction was beyond their expectations. They were too stunned to react, just standing there dumbfounded. I pulled my suitcase and left. As I passed the threshold, Ethan reached out to help me. He leaned close and whispered cheerfully, "Congratulations, sis, you've been reborn." The door closed behind me. From now on, that house had nothing to do with me. That night, I had a dream. I dreamed about the coat from that year. It had snowed heavily in sea, and it was freezing. I called home and asked my mother to send me a thick coat. She said, "Those coats are all for your sister now. Buy a new one yourself." But she didn't send me any money. It was too cold. So I used my living expenses to buy a padded jacket. When I went to the post office to pick it up, I saw a boy in a sweater huddled in a corner, his lips blue from the cold. I asked him, "Why are you wearing a coat?" "My coat is in my dad's car. He took my brother and left me here." "Should I call your dad?" "I already did. He said he'd get stuck in traffic if he came back to get me and told me to take a bus home." Tears sparkled in his eyes. "But I don't have any money. It's okay. Even if I freeze to death, he won't shed a single tear." At that moment, what was I thinking? I don't remember. I only remember I took off the package and handed him the military green coat. "Put this on. If you freeze to death, I'll cry for you." "What about you?" "I've already said my parents will buy me a new one. Live well. Love yourself." I said it to him, but also to myself. I gave him $5 for the bus fare, then turned and walked back to school. He chased after me shouting, "Sis, my name is Ethan. My name is Ethan. What's your name?" I didn't turn back, just waved at him. "Ethan." So that's when I met him.